For this piece, I'm going to replace the hardware to add different hardware for more vintage character. I clean all my pieces with TSP, which is a general purpose cleaner. Then I'm going to go and fill in the hardware holes with a wood filler. So I'm starting my base coat with Sloan's chalk paint in Old Ochre. This is similar to a warm white cream tone. I'm using random brush strokes to create textures, giving the paint high and low points. I am adding my second application of the base coat Old Ochre. Don't forget to add water with your spray bottle. I always make sure my brush is moist and I add water as I go. This is going to move your paint more freely and you use way less paint. It is a big help to pull your drawers out. This is going to help the paint from not gathering and clumping in between your drawer and frame.
So we have our second coat of Old Ochre, and what we're going to be doing is some sponging. I've never tried this technique, but it probably has a similarity with ragging, frottage, or just using a sponge. The trick is, the sponge is actually going to be moist. And when I say moist, not saturated, just moist. So you can keep rinsing the sponge out as you're putting your color glaze mixes onto your project. I've made 2 custom color mixes. And my first one is going to be a chalk paint, the Sloan chalk paint in olive. 4 parts clear glaze, 1 part paint. So there it is. And I also did one in French linen, which is a taupey chalk paint color by Sloan. And I made a 4-part, 1 part glaze mix. There's 2 types of sponging techniques. There is sponging on and sponging off. So sponging on means you're going to take the sponge, it's going to be damp, you're going to dip it into your glaze mix, then you're going to sponge on how you want your textures. You can make it kind of thick and dense, or you can wipe it back off the sponge and make it a little bit lighter, and you can change where the sponge is going, so it's going to change the effect of the texture. Sponging off means we are going to use any brush, chippy brush, just a flat edge brush or angle brush. You're going to paint your glaze on. You're going to take your clean, moistened sponge and you're going to sponge it off. So both will give you a very similar texture but slightly different. So you have both of those options if you want to give either one a go, whichever one you might be more comfortable with. So let's give this a go, and I'm going to go ahead and get started on the top, and I'm going to bring the camera closer so you can see the effect. And I think I'm going to start with the sponging on. So I'm going to take my moist sponge, dip it into my custom glaze, and I'm going to sponge it on. And let's see how this looks. just use the hot air gun. You can use a hair dryer just to speed up the process a little bit. And the sponging on is fantastic. I think the only thing that I think I may have done a little bit off is my sponge was actually still a little too wet. So slightly moist is the key. So you really want to wring it really, really well. Sponges can be deceiving to actually how wet they are. So I just kind of learned that just now. One thing I want to mention with any of the techniques that I am showing you when you're getting a very volume texture like this, it's very smooth to the touch when it's dry and complete. The frottage techniques, the ragging techniques, everything is super smooth. It looks like there is some kind of ridge or a textured feel to it, but especially for those that are for using tabletops and things like that, these are all smooth to the touch. The glaze actually self-levels, and so does the chalk paint. So when this is all applied, it just has a textured look. It doesn't have the same, it doesn't have it to the feeling as well. And you can still go over with light sandpaper if you're thinking that there's any fine particles in there and you just want to make it a really paper smooth. You are always welcome to do that as well, or some people like to have that bit of texture in the project itself. So I just wanted to quickly mention that. If for any reason, again, you're working with glaze colors like this and you're trying out these kind of techniques, you can always downtone them a little bit by adding your base color either in color wash, which would be 1 part paint, 1 part water, just to mute it out a little bit if you feel it's a little too bold. And, you know, as I say, I'm going to go and use the French linen, and I'm going to sponge. I'm actually going to sponge off with this. I did the sponge on with this, with the olive. Now I'm going to do the sponge off with the French linen. So let's see how that looks. So remember, the key with sponging off is to periodically rinse your sponge as it starts to get a little saturated with the glaze or color glaze. It just makes it easier so you're just not pushing moistened glaze around. You are always welcome to put a little extender in your color glaze mixes. If you want to take some more time to do your projects, that's not a problem. It just helps give more, obviously, extended time with your glaze mix, because glaze will dry fairly quickly. But with clear glaze, if you're going to do it within, you know, the time frame at the same time, you should be just fine. But it is nice to have the extender. A little bit will go a long way. As you can see, I am just doing sections, and the sections make it a lot easier to manipulate what you're doing. So I don't advise doing a big long section at once. Just break it off into smaller squares, depending on the size of your project, of course. the other thing I'm doing too is I'm moving the sponge around from the side to an angle, and just I'm basically creating different shapes as I'm moving it around, and this just adds to the texture effects. Makes it more fun. So I'm going to carry on, finish the rest of this with the French linen color glaze sponge. Then we're going to do another layer of color glaze in olive with sponging off. So we're going to apply it with the brush like we're doing right now, and we're going to sponge it off. I want to enhance the olive to come back now that we have this really cool undertone with both old ochre, our base, and our French linen right now. So let's see how that looks. Just finished the top with the sponging off. Again, that's laying the glaze down, the color glaze down, and taking the sponge and pulling the glaze off. For a little bit of a different textured feeling, I want the top and the bottom to be a little bit different. So I'm actually going to go ahead and reverse what I said. And I'm actually going to do sponge on, right from the glaze to the sponge onto the piece for the bottom. But the top, I'm going to do the sponging off. So off is with the sponge that's moist, coming off, sponge on, putting the glaze on the sponge, sponging it on. So I hope this isn't confusing. I'm just trying to reliterate myself as we keep going, so it just embeds in your minds what the sponge on, sponge off is. So that's how I'm going to try to make the tabletop a little bit different than the bottom. It will make sense hopefully at the end of all of this. So I'm going to continue going, and I'll continue filming so you can see the contrast difference of putting another color glaze sponge on the bottom. I know it still looks a little unfinished to you probably, but I'm going to go ahead and I am going to seal this with the clear wax. Then I'm going to take dark wax with a little bit around all the edges and corners. I'm going to put the hardware on, and I'm probably going to dark wax the hardware as well, just so it has this continuity that goes with the whole design of what I've done here. So all of this is going to make sense, and I'm really looking forward to staging this. So I'm going to do a little bit of spackling with my toothbrush. I dip it in. You can use whatever paint color you want, and this is a total option. You do not have to do this. I just like the character look of it. So I'm going to use some graphite, and I'm also going to use a little bit of white chalk paint, and I'm going to dip my brush, remove the excess so there's still a lot of moisture and paint inside the brush, and then I literally take my finger and I flick it, and then it just adds these nice little speckles all over. You can use a you can use a toothbrush, or you can even use an artist brush and just flick it so it flicks on. And just do little tiny bits. So make sure there's hardly any paint on here and it's moist enough, and then you just flick. And that way, if for any reason you flick and it just didn't go right or you didn't like it, you can literally just take a damp towel, paper towel, and just push really hard and push into it, and it will fade it out. So that's just a little control mechanism I wanted to throw in. This is why I love spackling. It just brings out this texture and character, and over time things get knocked and paint and all kinds of things, and that's what gives it this old character, and I absolutely love it. What I find spackle does do is it can highlight and add low light depending how much you spackle. Now there's a couple pieces that I've done in the past where the entire piece is so spackled it actually looks velvety. That's a word, velvety? Velvet. So the piece is so spackled it has a velvet-like look to it. It's actually quite it's quite amazing.